Professor Al Roth, welcome to the Marshall Institute for Philanthropy and Social Entrepreneurship. It's just such a delight to have you here at the London School of Economics. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
You have on many occasions talked about the importance of science for science's sake, and started yourself as a theorist, and yet have done some of the science in economics that have had the biggest impact on the world. So when you think about, talking to young economists who are thinking about which questions to pursue, or thinking about institutes who are, have an agenda for creating social impact in the world, and practitioners who are looking at that, what do you think in terms of the role of science and sort of experts in science, which have often been up for dispute, with the motivation to want to create change, positive social change?
Well, markets are tools to create positive social change. We use markets to coordinate with each other, to cooperate with each other, to compete with each other, to do things that we can't do by ourselves. And economics is really about all the things we do when we're not alone, all the ways that we form and navigate communities far and wide, communities near us and communities across the globe and through cyberspace. So they're tools. Markets are tools. And you can always ask the question, is this tool working well? Is it accomplishing what we want it to? Or could we get it to do something different if we think it's doing something badly? Markets, like languages, sometimes seem and do have a life of their own. Once you set a market in motion, things can happen that you might not like. But markets are human artifacts. So, one of my sort of manifestos for market design was called "The Economist as Engineer," and the idea was that we as economists ought to try to understand how markets work well enough that we can fix them when they're broken, and maybe help create new ones where they don't exist but should. I think of market design as an ancient human activity that economists are just starting to know enough about to be able to take part in a self-conscious way. Markets are tools made by human beings to help us coordinate. I like to draw the analogy with languages, which are also human artifacts. Now, we think of languages as arising naturally because they don't lend themselves very well to conscious design. But we have a lot of new words that didn't used to exist, and people introduced them, words like computer and smartphone and internet and Google. So languages adopt, and people were involved in choosing those words and the things they describe. Markets are easier to intervene in because markets may have proprietors, they may have interested groups of users. But of course, to the extent that it means something to say that markets just arise, what we mean is people are constantly thinking about ways to modify markets and the ways we interact with them, and some of those modifications catch on. That's what we mean by things naturally arising. So there's a sense in which Uber and Airbnb and Amazon naturally arose. But of course there's another sense in which they had entrepreneurs behind them who were designing markets for taxis and hotel rooms and how to sell things on the internet.
And when you think about the work, for example, that you've done in kidney exchange, which is actually selling and buying kidneys is illegal almost everywhere in the world, and it does seem like there is some, you've called it moral repugnance towards that. Where do you think that comes from, and how does that act in terms of thinking about which markets we can enter and which ones we can make more efficient with the science of market design?
Well, of course, the possibility of a market for kidneys is not an ancient possibility. The first organ transplants were done in the 1950s. And there's a great shortage of transplantable organs, but kidneys are special because healthy people have two kidneys and could remain healthy with one. So as it became possible, as people thought about the fact that maybe I could try to buy your kidney, we saw pretty universally laws against this. In the UK, there's the Human Tissue Act. In the US, there's the National Organ Transplant Act. But virtually around the world, with the significant exception of Iran, there are no legal monetary markets for kidneys. But a very LSE way of thinking about markets is that they aggregate information, right? What Hayek liked to talk about was how you have lots of potential non-repugnant trades that could go on, but you don't know where they are until you start operating some kind of market. And so one way that we are trying in the US and now also in the UK to a little bit ease the shortage of transplantable kidneys is to have clearinghouses that do kidney exchange. And the idea behind kidney exchange is you might be healthy enough to give someone a kidney and want to give a kidney to someone you love who's dying of kidney failure, but it might be that your kidney doesn't match them. Not everyone can take every kidney. And I might be in the same situation, but maybe you could give a kidney to my patient and I could give a kidney to your patient. And so two transplants that otherwise couldn't have happened will take place and lives will be saved and the shortage of kidneys will be a little bit eased. And no money changes hands. So it turns out in the United States we got an amendment to the National Organ Transplant Act that made clear that this was not an outlawed exchange under the terms of the act. And I don't know quite how that was handled in Britain, but you have kidney exchange here too. And no one seems to find that repugnant. And it helps save lives, so it's a good thing. It helps aggregate the information about what kidneys are available and who has them and who can take them.
What's also fascinating about the work you do is that the process of generating the science is done together with practitioners, right? I mean, with surgeons and with teachers and with administrators. And that is actually very consistent with the model of knowledge generation that we have here at the Marshall Institute and through many of the work that we do at the LSE, which is a model of co-generating knowledge together with practitioners and policymakers, so that the science we create is created with others, and that the action that's created through that science, then the findings of that make their way back into science. But that's an unusual way to generate knowledge and to practice science. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges, but also perhaps the benefits of such a model?
Well, economics touches on so many aspects of human life that economists are in the fortunate position of being able to learn something from almost everyone. And especially when you're involved in helping surgeons organize surgeries or helping school administrators organize school choice or helping labor markets, different professions organize their labor markets. As an economist who seeks to know something about markets but doesn't have a lot of expertise on those particular markets at the beginning, market designers have a lot to learn from our collaborators. And market design is, of course, a very outward-facing part of economics. We try to show up and help people when their markets are broken. And of course, there are many markets that are somewhat broken, and not all of them get redesigned in a useful way. And I think all the successes that my colleagues and I have had, each of them is associated with finding some internal champion. That is, in school choice, we started with the director of high school operations of the New York City Department of Education. In medical markets, we started with Elliot Parenson, who was already helping run the clearinghouse that American doctors use to match. In kidney exchange, my first surgeon partners were Frank Delmonico in New England and then Mike Reese in Ohio. And without surgeons to explain to other surgeons why it's worthwhile to listen to economists, there's very little chance of success. It turns out that surgeons didn't automatically think of economists as fellow members of the helping professions.
That's how funny that.
Yeah, there's no accounting. Yeah, that's why I wrote a book.
But clearly, though, the first people you spoke to, you had to code switch a little bit, right, to be able to speak
Absolutely.
well about.
Now, I don't have a formula for this, but often when you find the right person, you find that they're eager to talk to you, because you think about the market for American doctors. Most American doctors and most American medical administrators aren't particularly interested in how new doctors get their first jobs. They're interested in other things, how we do knee surgery, how we train gastroenterologists, all the things that doctors and medical administrators should be interested in. But there are some people, directors of medical fellowship programs, things like that, who worry a lot about how we hire doctors and how we place our new doctors. And when you finally meet the right guys, they're relieved. They've been trying to get their colleagues interested in this, but their colleagues just want to talk about how to make people healthier. And finally they meet someone who wants to talk about how doctors get jobs. So when you find the right people, often it's a two-way street. They're glad to hear that someone else has been thinking about this and happy to explain to you all the details you need to know, which isn't always a smooth process. It's not always obvious what details you need to know, either to you, since you don't know the details, or to them, since they don't know what you do.
Right. And so there has to be, I imagine, in that space too, a long period of relationship building to be able to understand.
Absolutely, and also some iteration. So in kidney exchange, when we first started to talk to our surgical colleagues, the way it worked is we wrote a paper, my colleagues Typhoon Sunmez and Utku Unver and I wrote a paper called Kidney Exchange, and we sent it to as many surgeons as we could think of. And only one of them answered, and that was Frank Delmonico. And we eventually helped him start the New England program for kidney exchange. But when he understood a little bit about what we thought should happen, he said to us, you're proposing much too ambitious a kind of kidney exchange. We're just going to be able to do the simplest exchanges between two pairs. If you want to be helpful, tell us how to organize those. And so we did, and that's how the New England program for kidney exchange began. But as we understood their constraints and a little better, we were able to say to them, it would really be helpful if you could do slightly larger exchanges, and eventually they were persuaded and figured out the logistics to let them do that. And then eventually we thought about how to organize even larger exchanges through chains. And that was an iterative process. It took a while. The first kidney exchanges that we organized were in the early 2000s. And it wasn't really till 2009 that we were in a position to talk about the benefits of long chains.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Roth.